Hello and good day. How important is the last 30 minutes of your lab class? Do you plan for it or does it just happen? If you had a dream about the perfect ending of lab, what would it look and feel like? Sometimes I think about all the lab classes I taught. People ask me, how could I enjoy them so much? Now, I'm not perfect, and I had my share of nightmare experiences, but I always asked what was going wrong, and why might that be? So let's talk about the last 30 minutes of lab. I have 5 suggestions. Some relate to all teachers, and others depend on the organization of your lab. The first principle is to tell students what to expect at the end of lab. If you tell them what to expect, and then you deliver it, they will act accordingly, and their habits will strengthen with each lab. Some lab teachers give weekly quizzes. There are many helpful ideas about testing students, but we'll leave that to other videos. My second suggestion applies to those who give weekly quizzes, whether you give a quiz at the beginning or end of lab. Make sure that quiz questions directly relate to the particular lab behaviors that you want from students. Remember, you are creating their habits. Think very specifically what you want them to do during the semester, and then write questions that exactly reward that behavior. As I have warned before, if you are testing from something that is already written in the lab book, you don't have much leverage to motivate students to actively participate in lab. Most lab teachers also use the end of lab to review experimental results and questions. This works especially well when all of the actual questions for next week's quiz are covered. Don't be coy here. Give students something of substance from their point of view, direct help for the quiz. I've seen many situations where teachers make a mystery of quiz questions, and their students do not commit to lab. If you review at the end of lab, make sure the review helps with next week's quiz. 3 suggestions so far about how you can use the last 30 minutes of class. First, tell students what to expect at the end of lab. Second, if you quiz, make sure test questions directly reward the lab behaviors you want from students. Third, if you review, make sure the review helps with next week's quiz. Perhaps you don't give weekly quizzes, or perhaps you only give a review for some of the more complicated labs. Otherwise, there is no review at the end of lab. What are some more options? Turn students loose as they finish. This is a big reward for the faster groups and allows you more time to help the slower groups. A great reward for you and them. There is no better way to reinforce students to work quickly and efficiently. Don't be surprised to see student groups beginning lab before class period starts. They will. You may want early finishers to stay until the end of lab. You could tell them to go get a cup of coffee and then have them return for a final checkout and perhaps clues for next week's quiz. This is an encouragement to stay. It leads to my final suggestion. Reward early finishers to stay until the end of lab. Another reward for early finishers is to provide them with an opportunity to work on particular problems they are having in lecture class. This time at the end of lab is fun to spend with students, and you'll gain big insights into general student academic problems, as well as very specific challenges they have in biology lecture and lab. These short study groups are a gold mine of experience and joy for you. As lab coordinator, I convinced lecture teachers to give me a few actual questions from their upcoming lecture exam. I made sure that all lab teachers had a constant flow of lecture test questions. The reinforcement on students was staggering. They began to beg for review sessions. This technique may seem common sense, but almost no one makes time for it. I've helped many lab teachers to integrate some of this special time into their labs, and they thanked me for this suggestion and passed it on to other new teachers. Sit down with a group of early finishers and ask them where they are having trouble. Students drop biology when they're failing in lecture, not because they can't pass lab class. Be the hero by helping them to succeed in lecture, and they will get through lab happily. When you don't have something extra for early finishers, then turn them loose. So we have 5 hints for how you can use the last 30 minutes of lab class. 1. Tell students what to expect at the end of lab. 2. If you quiz, make sure test questions directly reward the lab behaviors you want from students. 3. If you review, make sure the review helps with next week's quiz. 4. Turn students loose as they finish. 5. Reward early finishers to stay until the end of lab. Thank you and good day.